Good morning and welcome to the 49th Annual Metropolitan Chiefs and Sheriffs Association Awards for Valor ceremony. My name is Tim Schwarzkopf. I'm the police chief for the city of Prairie Village, and I'm the current president of the Metropolitan Chiefs and Sheriffs Association. On behalf of the association, I want to give a special thank you to the Greater Kansas City Public Safety Credit Union and the city of Riverside for co-sponsoring this event. I would also like to thank the members of the Kansas City Police Department Media Unit for making this day happen. I would like to especially thank Adrian Ortega, who has spent a great deal of time working on today's ceremony. While our ceremony this year is a little different due to the pandemic, it does not take away from the exceptional work by all of you. On behalf of the Metropolitan Chiefs and Sheriffs Association, we are honored to recognize you today. A few housekeeping items for this morning. We are asking everyone to keep their mask on, and we will not be shaking hands with award recipients. And we are only going to have one person handing out awards. After the ceremony, we are asking everyone to exit the doors on my left without delay. There will be opportunities to take pictures in the lobby area outside the ballroom. Fox 4 has generously allowed Lauren Halifax to be our master of ceremonies today, despite the ongoing pandemic. We promised them we would do everything we can to keep her healthy, so unfortunately, due to social distancing guidelines, she will be unable to take pictures with recipients like she's done so in the past. It's not because she doesn't want to, and we certainly appreciate everyone's understanding. If I could ask everyone to please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I would like to now introduce the mayor from Riverside, Kathy Rose.
Well, welcome to the city of Riverside and the Argosy Casino Hotel and Spa. We're really happy to have you all here. And again, we're here for round two. We had a wonderful presentation and congratulatory for our Missouri officers this morning, and we are equally excited to have that same for you. We know it looks and feels differently. Obviously, we don't have the yummy food, and we cannot do the shaking of the hands and all the hugging that I love to do. But we know that during these challenging times that it is important and more important than ever to honor the recipients here today. As an elected official, to all of you, I want you to know how grateful we are for your service to each of our communities, and we celebrate your commitment, dedication, and bravery, and enjoy your event. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. We are here today to recognize dozens of law enforcement officers from across the metro who have demonstrated exceptional bravery and selflessness in the line of duty. For the past 49 years, the Metropolitan Chiefs and Sheriffs Association has been pleased to give them the recognition that they deserve. As we begin the award ceremony, I'd like to introduce the people who will be assisting me today. Chief Chris Skinroot of the Riverside Police Department and our Vice President, and Chief Kevin Freeman of the North Kansas City Police Department and our Treasurer. Finally, I'd like to introduce our MC for the ceremony, Miss Lauren Halifax from Fox 4 News.
Good morning. I hate that it's like this year, but thank you so much for being here and for putting up with the way that we had to do this year. But I'm very grateful to be a part of it and so glad that we at least continued in some form. It is what you do every day on the job is so important. And I know that to you, you're just doing your job. But it's also important that we recognize you for those moments when you demonstrate tremendous valor and grace and intelligence under pressure. And that we tell those stories, that your families are able to also recognize you and feel that we appreciate what you do. And that we go on and we inform the public so that they know what you do every day and the dangers that you face. I did manage to keep it together for the most part during the Missouri Awards, but I have my stash of Kleenex in case I do cry. I apologize, because people come up to me inevitably afterwards and say, if you hadn't started crying, I wouldn't have started. But sometimes the things that you face on the job and your reactions in those moments, they demonstrate what's best about us, about you. And it's an inspiration to the rest of us. So please know that while to you you're just doing your job, what you stand for and the way you conduct yourselves in the line of duty, it matters, and it's an important story for us to recognize and for us to tell in our community. We're going to start with the Life-Saving Awards today. The first award goes to Deputies Jacob Beaker and Richard Jock Condon, who serve with the Johnson County Sheriff's Office. The story behind these awards: a young man collapsed at a wedding party at an event space in rural DeSoto back on September 5th of this year. So the 911 call takers had a hard time understanding what happened because of all the commotion in the background and a language barrier that existed. Deputy Beaker arrived about 5 minutes after the call came in, and he carried his automated external defibrillator with him into the reception hall. He found a 23-year-old lying on the floor with several people around him, and he was turning blue. Deputy Beaker realized he was in cardiac arrest, so he cut his shirt to apply the AED pads. Deputy Condon arrived about that time and saw a scar on the man's chest. They learned that he had had an aortic valve transplant and 2 open heart surgeries. The AED advised that they shock the man, which Deputy Beaker did. Deputy Condon then started chest compressions. The ambulance personnel arrived, and Deputy Beaker explained what they had already done. Deputy Condon continued with 325 more chest compressions, while Deputy Beaker administered 2 more shocks. He then delivered a 4th shock, and then 225 more compressions. For 15 minutes they worked. About 15 minutes after Deputy Beaker first arrived, the man finally regained a pulse and began to breathe on his own. After 2 days in a coma at a hospital, that man awoke and was able to get out of bed and move about his room on his own. His recovery continues. The Metro Chiefs and Sheriffs Association is pleased to present the Life-Saving Award to Deputies Jacob Beaker and Jock Condon of the Johnson County Sheriff's Office. The next Life-Saving Award goes to Officer Brandon Bates. He couldn't be with us today, but Chief McLaughlin from the Marion PD is accepting the award on his behalf. In the first part of his shift on March 13th of 2020, Officer Bates completed AED and CPR training. In the second part of his shift, he put the training to use. He was the first responder to arrive to a life-threatening medical call in the 5900 block of Antioch. A woman was unresponsive in her home, so he hooked her up to the AED and started CPR. Her pulse returned, she started to breathe again, and the ambulance crews then arrived and took her to a hospital. The Johnson County EMS medical director said that not only did that woman live, but she survived with normal brain function, all due to Officer Bates' efforts. The Metro Chiefs and Sheriffs Association is pleased to present the Life-Saving Award to Officer Brandon Bates of the Marion PD. The next Life-Saving Award goes to Master Police Officer Jared Ruby with the Marion Police Department. Master Police Officer Jared Ruby got dispatched to Home Depot on August 1st of this year when a customer collapsed and stopped breathing. An off-duty Kansas City, Kansas firefighter was doing CPR on this 69-year-old man when Officer Ruby arrived. Officer Ruby took over doing the CPR and connected the man to his AED. Well, the AED advised a shock, so Officer Ruby delivered it. After that, the man started breathing. He had a faint pulse. Paramedics arrived shortly thereafter and took over CPR. That man went on to recover from his heart attack at a nearby hospital and was released 2 weeks later. He suffered no neurological damage thanks to Officer Ruby's quick work. The Metro Chiefs and Sheriffs Association is pleased to present the Life-Saving Award to Master Police Officer Jared Ruby of the Marion Police Department. The next Life-Saving Award goes to Officers Richie Vargas and Kate Mans from the Overland Park Police Department. Officers Vargas and Mans were the first responders to arrive to a daycare where a 3-year-old child was not breathing and had no pulse. They learned that she had choked on a snack. So they hit her on the back to dislodge the food, then they started CPR. The officers performed CPR for about 2 minutes before the ambulance arrived. EMTs were able to get the rest of the food out. The child was choking on. They got it from her airway. She woke up, started crying before she was transported to a hospital. The Johnson County Med Act commander said the officers' timely response and actions undoubtedly saved that little girl's life. The Metro Chiefs and Sheriffs Association is pleased to present the Life Saving Award to officers Richie Vargas and Kate Manns of the Overland Police Department. The first Bronze Award for Valor goes to crime analyst Amanda Schulte and detectives Judd Brungart and Natalie Bright. They work for the Johnson County Sheriff's Office. This has been a cold case in this community for a long time. Back on August 15th of 2003, you may remember, 68-year-old David Ray Ninemeyer was working an extra shift in the produce section of the Apple Market grocery store in Westwood. It's a Walmart neighborhood market now. It's 6:05 in the morning. A disguised gunman came through the front door of the grocery store. He grabbed the cashier and started to rob her. The cashier screamed for help, and Ray, as he was prone to do, ran to her aid. The gunman saw Ray and shot him. That bullet struck Ray in the femoral artery, and in the minutes that followed, that father of 4 and grandfather to 10 died there at the scene. From the moment that call came out, through the last 17 years, law enforcement personnel from at least 10 federal, state, municipal, and county agencies have worked on this case. They all made important contributions. But as with any large cold case investigation, the efforts of a few individuals finally brought that case across the finish line to a point where it could be charged. In this case, over the last 2 years, it was detectives Natalie Bright and Judd Brungart and crime analyst Amanda Schulte from the Johnson County Sheriff's Office. While there have been many advances in technology since this crime, this case was solved by diligent application of good old-fashioned investigative techniques and instincts. Detectives Bright and Brungart traveled to Oklahoma, to southern Missouri, and points in between. They dug in the dirt more than once. They read through volumes of reports. They re-interviewed key witnesses, and they produced a new sketch of the suspect. They literally and figuratively sweated over every detail of this case. They interviewed the suspect and ultimately developed enough information for a suspect to be charged. Behind the scenes, their partner in all of this was crime analyst Amanda Schulte. There were 100 plus tips, 280 interviews, 540 reports, and more than 3,800 case file pages to catalog and draw relevant information from. Any detective can tell you the value of a dedicated analyst, and Amanda Schulte filled that role perfectly. She was an integral part of cold case briefings and aided in solving the case. The Metro Chiefs and Sheriffs Association is pleased to present the Bronze Award for Valor to crime analyst Amanda Schulte and detectives Judd Brungart and Natalie Bright of the Johnson County Sheriff's Office. The next Bronze Award for Valor goes to officers Nikolai Pleshka and Michael Steele from the Kansas City, Kansas Police Department. On the afternoon of September 17th, 2019, a woman in a white car who looked upset in an industrial area near the split of the KCK and Missouri rivers prompted a 911 call to check her welfare. When officers Pleshka and Steele arrived to check on her, she quickly maneuvered her car around theirs and drove straight toward the river. Officer Pleshka was able to get a hold of her driver's side door and open it as she drove by, telling the woman, "You don't want to do this." But she kept driving down towards the embankment, forcing Officer Pleshka to let go. The vehicle came to a stop with about a third of it submerged in the river. Officer Steele removed his outer vest and went into the river. He tried to pull the woman out, but she clung to the steering wheel, shouting, "No, let me die." He unbuckled her seatbelt. Then she clung to that. Officer Pleshka joined Officer Steele in the water, both of them trying to wrestle that woman out of her car. They finally got her out. They placed her on the mud of the levee, and for everyone's safety, they tried to handcuff her, but she tried to then grab Officer Steele's gun. The officers prevented her from getting it and got her into handcuffs. While they were escorting her back to their patrol car to await an ambulance, she told them she wasn't going to use the gun on officers. She intended to use it on herself. She had no physical injuries. She was taken to a hospital for a mental health evaluation. Officers Pleshka and Steele fought the river, the mud, and the woman herself to save her life. The Metro Chiefs and Sheriffs Association is pleased to present the Bronze Award for Valor to officers Nikolai Pleshka and Michael Steele of the Kansas City, Kansas Police Department. The next Bronze Award for Valor goes to officers John Forcier, Drew Bolton, and Christopher Tegnazian. They work for the Olathe Police Department. Officers unfortunately encounter victims of drug overdoses on a fairly regular basis, but the challenges officers Bolton, Forcier, and Tegnazian faced to resuscitate a victim on the afternoon of September 29th, 2019 were far out of the ordinary. They got a call on an overdose. They found the man unconscious in a crawl space underneath a house in the 800 block of South Weaver Street. Officers Bolton and Tegnazian had to hold Officer Forcier's legs to lower him into a small opening to extract the man. They soon learned that the crawl space was flooded with raw sewage. Yeah. Working together, they managed to pull this unconscious man out of the sewage-flooded crawl space. They laid him in the yard. Officer Forcier administered a dose of the drug Narcan to combat what they suspected was an opioid overdose. Then he started chest compressions. Ambulance personnel arrived. They administered a second dose of Narcan, and the man went on to regain full consciousness before they transported him to a hospital. The Metro Chiefs and Sheriffs Association is pleased to present the Bronze Award for Valor to officers John Forcier, Drew Bolton, and Christopher Tegnazian of the Olathe Police Department. The next Bronze Award for Valor goes to officers John Forcier and Alex Salmon of the Olathe Police Department. Officer Forcier and Officer Salmon were dispatched to the intersection of Northgate and Harold Street on the morning of September 8th, 2020. It was for someone who had been struck by a train. The officers arrived and found a man who was suffering from a head wound as well as the amputation of both legs. Officers Forcier and Salmon worked quickly to apply tourniquets to the man's legs to try to prevent any further blood loss. The man was taken to a local hospital, still alive. The next day, officers learned that man was brain dead, but because of their efforts, his organs could be harvested. Those were donated to save the lives of many other people. The Metro Chiefs and Sheriffs Association is pleased to present the Bronze Award for Valor to officers John Forcier and Alex Salmon of the Olathe Police Department. The next Bronze Award for Valor goes to Officer David Marchbanks from the Overland Park Police Department. Officer Marchbanks was off duty during the evening rush hour of February 23rd of this year. He came upon a crash involving a car and motorcycle near 95th Street in Monrovia in Lenexa. He learned the motorcycle had been driving erratically and had a high rate of speed when it struck a vehicle in the intersection and burst into flames. The motorcycle driver was seriously hurt. Officer Marchbanks and an off-duty nurse worked together to provide life-saving aid, including using a belt as a tourniquet to stop that motorcyclist's severe bleeding. The driver has undergone several surgeries since then, including a partial leg amputation, but survived. The Metro Chiefs and Sheriffs Association is pleased to present the Bronze Award for Valor to Officer David Marchbanks of the Overland Park Police Department. Our last Bronze Award for Valor goes to Sergeant Timothy Tinnon from the Overland Park Police Department, but Sergeant Tinnon could not be with us today. Now to the Silver Awards for Valor. The first one goes to Officer Jay Doleshow from the Kansas City, Kansas Police Department. Kansas City, Missouri police pursued a vehicle. It was driven by a man who had just tried to run down a KCPD officer on August 21st of 2019. The pursuit traveled into Kansas, at which point Kansas Highway Patrol took over. The driver dangerously went eastbound in the westbound lanes of I-70 before stopping his vehicle and bailing out near Mill Street. The suspect ran north through the St. Margaret's housing complex. Officer Dolachau was not dispatched, but was nearby and wanted to help. KCPD's helicopter remained overhead, and that let the officers on the ground know where the suspect was headed. Officer Dolachau went into the housing complex on foot. The suspect stopped and drew a handgun as Officer Dolachau and other police arrived. After watching the other officers and holding his semi-automatic handgun, the suspect turned to Officer Dolachau. The suspect then pointed his weapon at the officer. Officer Dolachau fired at the suspect, striking and incapacitating him. The suspect was later declared deceased. Officer Dolachau risked his own life to protect the lives of his fellow officers and those in the housing complex as well. The Metro Chiefs and Sheriffs Association is pleased to present the Silver Award for Valor to Officer J. Dolachau of the Kansas City, Kansas Police Department. The next Silver Award for Valor is presented to Major Justin Dungan, Captain Keith Faulkner, Sergeants Scott Laddish and Leanne Shelton, Officers Richard Peters, Jeffrey Gardner, Ian Abbott, Yang Vang, Dallas Thompson, Walter Jones, and Tu Zong, all with the Kansas City, Kansas Police Department. A heavily armed 51-year-old man walked to the front desk of Country Inn and Suites at Village West on the morning of August 13th of 2019. The man told the desk clerk he had just killed his wife. He then told the clerk to call 911. Hotel employees then saw him speed away in an orange Maserati south on 110th Street. Sergeant Scott Laddish spotted the car just south of State Avenue on Village West Parkway. The car was parked and the suspect was standing outside it. He was pacing and holding an AR-type weapon. Sergeant Laddish radioed for backup, and as the units arrived, he directed them on how to position their cars and where to fill in. Then Sergeant Keith Faulkner assisted with leading the situation, directing officers where to go, when to take cover, and when to use shields. Major Dustin Dungan took over notifications to dispatch and other first responders. Officer Richard Peters went into harm's way to bring Major Dungan a ballistic shield. The officers surrounded the suspect and ordered him to drop the rifle. In addition to those already on scene, this included Sergeant Leanne Shelton, Officers Jeffrey Gardner, Ian Abbott, Yang Bang, Dallas Thompson, Walter Jones, and Tu Zong. The suspect paced with his weapons back and forth for several minutes as the officers continued to command him to drop it. At one point, then Sergeant Faulkner saw the suspect take a shooting stance for the second time. Captain Faulkner fired one round at the suspect. The suspect then fired at officers and ran toward them. Faulkner and Sergeant Laddish and Officers Gardner, Zong, Thompson, and Vang all returned fire until the suspect stopped running at them and fell to the ground. He was fatally wounded. Officers checked the Maserati for any signs that could lead to his wife, whom he claimed to have killed. And that's when they saw the second gun. There was a revolver on the hood of the car. The next day, investigators found a handwritten note by the suspect at his home. It said that he had murdered his wife and that he planned to die by suicide in an encounter with police. Investigation later revealed the man, a Lenexa resident, had indeed murdered his wife and buried her in Arkansas not long before his encounter with police. He was heavily armed and had extensive military training as well. He had fired at least 18 rifle rounds at the officers, but none of them was hurt. The Metro Chiefs and Sheriffs Association is pleased to present the Silver Award for Valor to Major Justin Dungan, Captain Keith Faulkner, Sergeants Scott Laddish and Leanne Shelton, and Officers Richard Peters, Jeffrey Gardner, Ian Abbott, Yang Vang, Dallas Thompson, Walter Jones, and Tu Zong of the Kansas City, Kansas Police Department. Our final silver award for valor this year goes to officers Nicholas Sanders, Dallas Thompson, John Smith, and Kevin Yoon from the Kansas City, Kansas Police Department. About 12:45 in the afternoon on July 8th of 2020, a woman reported that her daughter had been kidnapped and was being held against her will at the Regency Motel. The woman said her daughter owed someone money, and the suspect had already shot at her daughter's husband. The husband left, but her daughter was still inside the room with the suspect. When officers Yoon, Sanders, Smith, and Thompson all knocked on the door, the suspect answered that nothing was going on, and he hadn't called the police. As they talked to the suspect, the victim opened the curtains and started screaming out the window for officers to help her. She then disappeared, but officers could still hear her screaming inside that the suspect had a gun. The officers tried to kick the room's door in, but were unable to do so. So Officer Sanders used his baton to break out the window. At that time, the officers unlocked the door and the victim was able to run out. The suspect threw his handgun out the door during the chaos. As the officers were placing the suspect in handcuffs, he started to have a seizure. Officers Yoon and Smith took the handcuffs off. They moved him to his side in the recovery position. They ordered EMS, and the suspect was taken to a hospital for treatment. The victim then told the officers the suspect had held her against her will and raped her. He was later booked on multiple charges, including aggravated assault, criminal restraint, and aggravated sodomy. The officers successfully rescued that woman from an armed man and then even cared for the suspect in his seizure. The Metro Chiefs and Sheriffs Association is pleased to present the Silver Award for Valor to officers Nicholas Sanders, Dallas Thompson, John Smith, and Kevin Yoon of the Kansas City, Kansas Police Department. The Gold Award for Valor this year goes to officers Connor Payton, Samuel Massey, Cameron Finley, and Blake Shahan of the Olathe Police Department. Officer Connor Payton got dispatched a little after midnight on November 25th of 2019 to check on two teenagers potentially breaking into cars. This was in the 400 block of South Cardinal Drive. She saw the teens, she got out of the patrol car and tried to talk to them. They yelled an expletive at her and walked south. One of them threw a bag of marijuana to the ground, and then he unexpectedly turned toward Officer Payton and started shooting at her. Officer Payton returned fire. No one was hit. Then Officer Samuel Massey got to the scene and took cover behind a vehicle. The suspect also fired shots at him. Officers Cameron Finley and Blake Shahan arrived, and the officers worked as a team to contain the two suspects while maintaining cover. Both of those teens repeatedly ignored the officers' commands to drop their weapons. One of the teens eventually dropped his handgun and continued to walk away from the officers. He tried to get into one of the officers' patrol cars at that point. Officer Finley then deployed a taser, but it was unsuccessful. This caused the second suspect to slow down momentarily, and that gave Officer Shahan an opportunity to attempt an arrest. The teen resisted and began fighting Officer Shahan. The first teen then ran over to attempt to free his friend by repeatedly striking Officer Shahan in the head. The second teen reached for a nearby handgun on the ground. Officer Shahan then fired one round at the second teen, striking him. The suspect stopped resisting, and all the officers were able to move in and take them both into custody. Then they transitioned into life-saving mode, providing first aid to that injured suspect. The teen survived his injury, and both of the suspects, who were 16 years old at the time, are now awaiting trial. Despite the life-threatening danger, none of those officers suffered serious injury. The Metro Chiefs and Sheriffs Association is pleased to present the Gold Award for Valor to officers Connor Payton, Samuel Massey, Cameron Finley, and Blake Shahan of the Olathe Police Department. And finally today, we want to present the award for Kansas Officer of the Year. The Officer of the Year Award is presented to an officer who displays exceptional valor in the face of great danger. It is the most prestigious award given by the Metropolitan Chiefs and Sheriffs Association, and it's a surprise to the winner every year. This year's recipient is no stranger to the Officer of the Year Award. He also won it last year for his exceptionally valorous acts in stopping an active shooter. On May 3rd of this year, Officer Michael Mosier donned his Overland Park Police Department uniform and headed out to the station to begin another day of work on his patrol shift. As he drove through Overland Park, he came upon what appeared to be somebody who had been involved in a hit-and-run crash. Before getting out of his vehicle, Officer Mosier used his police radio to put himself in service and requested assistance in handling the crash. Dispatchers handled his request. Officer Mosier contacted the man who had been involved in the crash. The man was verbally combative, and Officer Mosier was trying to calm him down. Officer Mosier radioed for the backing unit to speed up their response because of the suspect's behavior. Seconds after calling for that increased response, literally just a couple of seconds, the suspect drew a small handgun from behind his back. He pointed it at Officer Mosier and fired one round. Officer Mosier pushed the gun away and drew his service weapon. He fired several rounds at the suspect. That suspect fired more rounds at Officer Mosier. Both of them suffered fatal gunshot wounds. The suspect died there at the scene, and Officer Mosier was pronounced dead at the nearest hospital. Officer Mosier died a hero that day, saving the community and other officers from what was a very dangerous suspect. He was not just a hero in times of danger, he was a force for good in our community year-round. He championed children, other people in need. He supported events that helped Special Olympians, impoverished children, and military families. He helped coordinate community celebrations for families. And he was never afraid to ruffle a few feathers for the right cause. His final act was one of extraordinary valor that cost him his life. The Metro Chiefs and Sheriffs Association would like to honor the late Officer Michael Mosier of the Overland Park Police Department as the 2020 Officer of the Year. We invite his family to come forward and accept on his behalf.
Please join me in giving one more round of applause to today's award recipients. Thank you again to our generous sponsors, the Greater Kansas City Public Safety Credit Union and the City of Riverside. Again, if you'd like to take pictures, there will be an Awards for Valor backdrop just outside the ballroom. While taking pictures, we do remind you to be mindful of social distancing. Finally, I'd like to thank all of you for attending today's 49th Annual Awards for Valor ceremony. Enjoy the rest of your day.